Are you familiar with the term fight or flight? It conjures up sort of that caveman part of the brain and sort of down the back there where you just had to react back in the old days. Neanderthals, fleeing woolly mammoths, skinning a saber-toothed tiger. But in fact, that little bit of our brain, it's still in there. That fight or flight response is still in our bodies. To help you understand the fight or flight response, and by you, I of course mean me, we've got Rachel Hannam, a Brisbane psychologist who you have probably heard on ABC Radio before. She is the co-host of the Help Me, I'm a Comedian podcast. Hi, Rachel.
Hi, Mel. How are you?
I'm very good. And look, I need to get myself on that podcast, please, Rachel.
Yeah, that would be tremendous.
Do you reckon we could do, I don't know, like a marathon episode? Because I've got a lot we could get through, I think.
I would absolutely love that.
Oh, brilliant.
Yep.
So we're here to talk fight or flight, which links into my other little side hustle of comedy, but we'll get to that in a moment. What is the fight or flight response, Rachel Hannam?
So it's the reaction that our sympathetic nervous system has in response to a perceived threat. So it's a physiological reaction that has evolved to help us survive. And as you said before, we've all got it. And so we know what it feels like. So our heart rate increases, our respiration rate increases, we breathe faster. But some other things people might not know are happening in the fight-flight response is that our pupils dilate and our vision actually improves. We may actually create better, clearer memories of things. This is our brain trying to remember what to avoid in the future. And it shuts down our digestion and makes our muscles use up the sugars that are stored in them. So there's a whole lot going on physiologically, and it's a very, very helpful response when we need to literally run or fight to increase our chances of survival.
Is it useful to us, though, in modern times, Rachel? Because I haven't been in that many fights lately.
I'm glad to hear that, Mel.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, because it increases, has these positive effects, such as increasing our vision. So if we're doing a university or a high school exam, a bit of stress, a bit of the fight-flight response, is good because it can actually help us focus and it can help us stay, it increases concentration. It can also help us forget about pain. So think of tennis players or runners. Because their attention is so sharpened to the task at hand, they're essentially distracted from the pain. And so that's a good thing, in many situations in our modern lives. And so enhancing memory retention, as I said, is another good advantage. The problem is in our modern life, often we're running on adrenaline, and so we're producing too much over a long period of time, and then we run into trouble.
I want to go a bit deeper on that. Are you referring to adrenal fatigue there, Rachel?
Yeah, so that's the name commonly given to this syndrome. It's not a disease, but a syndrome where we've been producing a lot of stress. Our adrenal glands, which sit on top of our kidneys, produce a range of hormones. Adrenaline is just one of them. Cortisol is another one many people would have heard of. Actually produces 50 hormones. But when we've been producing too many stress hormones for too long, we do feel the fatigue. We might have intermittent crashes throughout the day. Our moods may be up and down. We may get brain fog. We may crave more sugar, more caffeine, and our immune system can be compromised in adrenal fatigue as well.
I've done a bit of Dr. Googling, and I reckon I could have just a little smidge of adrenal fatigue, Rachel. Is there a cure, or is it about lifestyle changes?
I think a lot of people in our modern culture do have a degree of adrenal fatigue. And absolutely, this comes down to the old self-care sort of mantra. There's a few ways we can manage adrenal fatigue. Our diet is a big one. And it's I often talk to people about the Mediterranean diet. Lots of fruit and vegetables, whole grains, proteins, lots of those healthy fats which are good for our brain. good high quality salt, and then reducing things like white sugar, white flour, alcohol, caffeine, processed foods. And taking supplements like vitamin C and magnesium can be very helpful. The other big one is physical exercise, because the exercise uses up those stress hormones, particularly the adrenaline. So they're the physical things we can do. And then there's psychotherapies, meditation, mindfulness, these kind of psychological interventions as well.
This is a question I've always wanted to know the answer to, Rachel Hannam. I do stand-up comedy for a job, and
yes,
how I describe it to people who go, how do you do that? I could never do that. That must be so stressful. You must be so brave. It's kind of, I think there is a little bit of fight or flight in there, but I say to them, it's like there's a tiger in front of you, but you don't fight or flight. You stand there, even though you're a bit afraid, and try to impress the tiger into not eating you. Does that have a name in psychology at all, Rachel?
Well, I think we shouldn't be down on our adrenaline and our cortisol, particularly adrenaline, because like I said at the start, it feeds your brain with sugars, which is really helpful in recalling your set. It helps you focus. It gives you the attention, helps you draw on your memory of your work that you're going to present when you're up on stage. It gets more oxygen to your brain. So adrenaline is doing a lot of good stuff when you stand on that stage and do your set. So you do want some. You don't want so much that you end up in one of the other stress responses, which is freeze or faint. So there is an optimal amount of stress, of adrenaline. It sounds like you have nailed it.
Well, it's very, very nice to hear. So with this, the use of adrenaline you're talking about, it's for emergencies, right? So my producer Kim and I were having a chat putting the show together this week about how you hear about those amazing stories where a mum saw her child was trapped under the car and somehow she was just able to pick the car off her child to rescue the baby. Is that work of Hollywood fiction? Is that the fight or flight response? What is that, Rachel?
That's absolutely the fight or flight response, really, coming to the rescue. So, in that emergency situation, so it really helps with performance. When you're on stage, the adrenaline helps you perform. But when that mum, sees that car trapping her child's leg, then she's got another kind of performance, right? And that is to try and save her and protect her child. And because the adrenaline increases focus and concentration, we forget about pain, we have more oxygen to our muscles, more access to the energy in our muscles, we do get that hysterical strength, as they call it, maybe up to 30 to 40% more than we would if we were relaxed. But there are still limits. It's not like we get 10 times our normal strength. But yes, those stories about people lifting tractors off other people or tackling polar bears to the ground, that these are true stories.
I'm wondering about people who work constantly in what I would see as a really stressful career with probably lots of fight or flight, like race car drivers who we'll be speaking to one next, actually, maybe soldiers. How do they deal with fight or flight? Are they just in it? Do they learn not to go into that state? What do they do, Rachel?
Well, I think people who do very physical jobs are using that adrenaline up as they're producing it. This is why I mentioned exercise earlier. So not everybody who does really intense work, such as driving a race car or soldier, not everybody ends up with chronic fatigue syndrome or burnout or PTSD, but that is the risk, as we know, with people who've come back from, the armed forces. There's a high rate of PTSD, which adrenal fatigue, is associated with PTSD because we've taxed the adrenals in such a way that then we've damaged them. We've caused this chronic deficiency. But if people have, some of it's genetic risk factors. Some people are just naturally more able to cope, more able to process and metabolize their stress hormones, more able to come back to their baseline level of calm. It's, there's a whole lot of reasons why that is. And then some people struggle more to do that. And so, the risk is adrenal fatigue, burnout, depression, PTSD. And so anyone who's doing those kind of intense jobs needs to learn how to, increase their self-awareness so that they're monitoring themselves for signs of burnout, of PTSD, of depression.
Rachel Hannam, thank you so much for chatting to me this afternoon on ABC Radio.
Thanks for having me, Mel. I look forward to seeing you on my podcast one day.
Oh, yes, please.